The controversial count in Florida. Bush still clings to a narrow lead. Gore's hopes hang by a Chad, and the counters are making accusations.
The only way that the Gore camp can get the votes that they need to take this election is to change the rules.
This is an honest process that I think is working very well.
President Clinton's excellent adventure in Vietnam, and the frustration ahead for ordinary travelers this Thanksgiving week.
Get there early. Expect lines everywhere.
From NBC News World Headquarters in New York, this is NBC Nightly News, reported by John Siegenthaler.
Good evening, everyone. Attorneys for George W. Bush and Al Gore are headed for a major legal showdown tomorrow in the Florida Supreme Court. The central dispute, whether or not votes from the hand recount in 4 counties should be included in the official statewide total. 7 Florida justices could determine the outcome of this election. According to the current tally, Bush leads Gore in Florida by just 930 votes out of 6 million cast. But the Bush campaign is not only challenging the hand recount, today it renewed complaints about the rejection of some overseas military ballots that weren't postmarked. We begin our coverage in Tallahassee with NBC's Kelly O'Donnell. Good evening, Kelly.
Good evening, John. Tonight, the debate over when a vote is a vote. Democrats preparing to ask the Florida Supreme Court to okay not just hanging chads, but any mark or indentation on a ballot that could be interpreted as voters' intent. Republicans call that a guessing game. Hardly a day of rest. Yet both candidates out today projecting a kind of relaxation neither side can show behind the scenes. Governor and Laura Bush attended church in Austin.
Hello, how are you all?
Vice President Gore and wife Tipper jogged inside their Washington, D.C. compound. Both men keeping their distance publicly from the ground war in Florida. Today, the state Supreme Court here opened for business. Briefs filed in preparation for tomorrow's arguments on whether the hand-counted vote totals should be included in Florida's final tally. Gore advisor Warren Christopher.
Well, we just got our reply brief filed, and we're going to take a little walk before the next round starts.
Late today, more accusations from the Bush campaign concerning the manual recount.
There's never been a uniform standard from the very beginning that's lasted all the way through when it comes to talking about which of these ballots are going to be counted and which ones are not.
As the hand counting continues tonight in 2 counties, differing standards are still at issue. In Volusia County, which used paper ballots, counters tallied only those where the voter marked inside the oval. The hand recount is finished there. But the other 3 counties use punch cards, and each sets its own guidelines. In Palm Beach County, even indented chads are counted. Broward County requires at least 2 corners of the chad be punched out. Miami-Dade, which starts its hand count tomorrow, has not yet finalized its plan. On another front, the public relations fight over rejected overseas absentee ballots. Republicans claim Democrats targeted military votes for disqualification. Democrats deny any attempt to exclude military votes, saying local officials determined which ballots were valid. On NBC's Meet the Press, Joe Lieberman, while not saying every uncounted overseas absentee ballot should be included now, supports giving them, quote, the benefit of the doubt.
I'd urge them to go back and take another look, because again, Al Gore and I don't want to ever be part of anything that would put an extra burden on the military.
Neither the Bush or Gore campaigns know yet exactly how many of the 1,400 disqualified votes were cast by servicemen and women. But Democrats point out that many rejected votes are from civilians, citing Lee County. Democrats say nearly all, 29 of 33 disqualified overseas absentee votes, were non-military. Tonight, Gore officials seem to back away from Joe Lieberman's comments. The campaign saying that those rejected overseas ballots really don't need a second look because they believe local officials who rejected them followed Florida law. John?
NBC's Kelly O'Donnell. Kelly, thanks. Despite the controversy over hand recount procedures, Palm Beach and Broward counties kept counting by hand this weekend. NBC's Jim Cummins is in Broward County tonight. Good evening, Jim.
Good evening, John. That's right. The pace of the hand recount here in Broward County is picking up, with more than half of the 588,000 votes now counted. Al Gore has added only 90 votes to his total. But this process is not producing the big number of new votes some Democrats had expected from the manual recount of these Democratic Party strongholds in South Florida.
5, Bush, 6, Gore.
The Democrats blame the standards used to decide what is a vote and what is not.
9 undervote, and it looks like very slight for Gore.
They call them undervotes, and they are never counted in Broward County because the punch card Chad is only dimpled or is still attached on at least 3 corners instead of punched completely out. Democrats say they should all count as votes.
That would be my position, and I think that that would be a fair position also, because that would show that somebody took the effort of pushing that vote. Why it didn't go through, who knows?
Republicans say that's ridiculous.
They've been counting here in Broward County under a set of rules. They now want to change them to allow more questionable votes to be counted. That's like changing the rules in the third quarter of a football game.
But a local judge is urging Broward County to count all the ballots with damaged Chads. Canvass Board Chairman Robert Lee thinks the state Supreme Court should decide because so much is at stake.
If we are required to change the procedure of evaluating the ballots, there are clearly, literally going to be hundreds of more votes in this county that will be counted. In all likelihood, the majority of those will go to Al Gore.
In Palm Beach County, accusations from Republicans and Democrats over the entire process of recounting 462,000 votes by hand.
I did witness several ballots with Scotch tape over the punch holes, which would have been Bush punch holes, and obviously, you know, that's definitely a problem.
All these problems, I think, do not really exist, and that may be the spin that's coming out of the room from both parties.
Emotions are running high as a manual recount of more than 1 million votes in both counties heads towards a conclusion sometime in the next day or so. John?
NBC's Jim Cummins. Jim, thank you. Now to NBC's Pat Dawson in Miami, where hand counting will begin tomorrow. Good evening, Pat.
Good evening, John. Republicans in Miami tried one last time this morning to prevent a hand count in Florida's most populous county. The effort failed, opening the door to a recount that could add hundreds, maybe thousands of new votes to the state's total.
At mid-morning, election workers cut the seals on Miami-Dade's ballot trays. Then the first of the ballots are run through tabulating machines, not to count, but to identify and separate ballots like this one, without a clear vote for president.
The American people can see it. The people of Florida can see it. Republicans and Democrats have all the observers they want.
2 Republican and 2 Democratic observers kept a close watch on the process today. In Dade County, the undercount, ballots with holes not completely punched through, will be examined individually by the county's canvassing board starting tomorrow. Officials here said today's effort went very smoothly, but a Republican observer had a different take, especially after a tray with hundreds of ballots was dropped.
They spilled out all over the floor among people's feet, and then people scrambled to try to pick them up.
This is at the heart of the GOP argument against manual recounts, that all the handling will somehow damage ballots. Supervisor of Elections David Leahy has worked on the county's ballots for 22 years.
In my opinion, this is in no way affecting the integrity of the ballots at all.
Democratic Miami-Dade went for Al Gore, though narrowly. Republican fears and Democratic hopes ride on these ballots, an estimated 10,700 set aside, not counted, because the machines couldn't read them. According to a precinct-by-precinct record provided to NBC News, many of the election districts with a substantial Gore advantage also have a high number of uncounted ballots.
In just 6 of those precincts in Democratic-leaning areas, we found more than 400 uncounted ballots. Those precincts voted for Gore by a 3-2 margin. John?
NBC's Pat Dawson. Pat, thanks. So 12 days after the election, the Florida State Supreme Court will be asked to decide how the vote should be counted. NBC's Dan Abrams is in Tallahassee. Good evening, Dan.
Good evening, John.
What's the key difference between the legal briefs filed by the Bush and Gore teams?
Well, the most important difference is whether the Secretary of State has the discretion to reject these manual recount votes. The Democrats, on the one hand, say she must accept them. The Republicans say she must reject them. And then both argue this sort of middle ground. If she does have discretion, did she abuse it? But now this new issue today, as we've been hearing about these Chads, the Democrats, for the first time, arguing in front of the Supreme Court that any indentation should be considered a vote. The Republicans saying that simply would not be fair. The Democrats are now trying to change the rules.
So how is this going to work tomorrow logistically in court?
Well, each side is getting an hour, which is actually a lot in this court. The Republicans, in all likelihood, will share their time with the Secretary of State. The Democrats will share their time with the county's lawyers in addition to the Attorney General. But don't expect this to be some sort of lecture from the lawyers to the court. These justices are going to be in there from moment one, peppering these lawyers with questions.
This court has moved rather quickly so far. When might we hear a decision?
Well, most of the time in the Florida Supreme Court, a decision takes months. But in this case, time is of the essence, and both sides telling me they're expecting a ruling within 2 days.
And after we get this decision, it doesn't necessarily mean this legal battle is over, does it?
Well, not necessarily. Most people are certainly hoping it will. But there is a possibility this court will say, let's wait until we get all these manual recounts in before we make any final determination. But even if they do have a definitive ruling, there's certainly a chance that there are other legal issues that could come up. John?
All right, NBC's Dan Abrams in Tallahassee. Dan, thank you. And NBC News will provide live coverage of tomorrow's court hearing beginning at 2 Eastern Time. With so much still uncertain nearly 2 weeks after the election, Dateline NBC decided to take a look at how the public felt about all of this. We have some of the findings, which will be discussed in detail on Dateline later tonight. When we asked whether the campaign should continue their legal challenges if Florida Supreme Court rules against them, 62% of those questions said no. Only half as many said yes. And when Dateline asked how much longer they would be willing to wait for a decision on the next president, 41% said a couple of days, 12% said a couple of weeks, and 44% said, the largest single group, said however long it takes. And coming up next, how the candidates are handling the long wait. They are not in Florida, but what happens there will determine whether George W. Bush or Al Gore becomes the next president. So both are trying to behave presidentially. NBC's Campbell Brown is covering the Bush campaign, and Chip Reed is covering Vice President Gore. Let's begin with you, Campbell. Is this, in a sense, a new phase of the campaign?
Absolutely, John. As important as winning the legal battle, the Bush campaign has to try to convince the American people that he has fairly won this election. And right now they're fighting to do two things. Number one, convince people that the hand counts should not be added to the final vote tally. And number two, convince people that those absentee ballots from overseas should be included in the final tally. And their strategy now is to put a human face on both of these issues. The Bush campaign has been complaining about the mishandling of ballots. Well, now they have provided us with affidavits of people who have witnessed these problems, and they're encouraging those people to speak out so that it's not just the campaign complaining, but it's the people who are directly involved in the process. They're taking a similar tact with regard to the absentee ballots. They're having people like General Norman Schwarzkopf and Senator Bob Dole, military heroes, speak out and claim that it's un-American these votes not be counted again, so that it's not the Bush campaign complaining, but again, people directly affected by the process. John?
And Chip Reed, this isn't just a legal battle, it's a PR battle, isn't it?
Absolutely, John. Public relations is a big part of this, but it's certainly not as high profile as the legal battle now. The public relations battle is kind of behind the scenes. They are sending out a number of Democrats to fight this argument that the Republicans are making, that this manual recount process is essentially chaotic and corrupt. They understand that that argument could be bought by the American people, and that would be very dangerous for them if that were to happen. So what the Democrats are arguing is, number one, that this kind of manual recount has been going on across the country in jurisdictions including Florida and Texas for years, and it is something that has usually been fairly non-controversial. We're just seeing it up so close this time that people are able to portray it as chaotic and corrupt, but they say it is not at all. Also, the vice president they are trying to portray not as this man obsessively involved in every detail, all the nitty-gritty here. They sent him out today to go jogging, and they say he is calm, relaxed, and confident.
All right, NBC's Chip Reed and Campbell Brown. Chip, thanks very much. The current